From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Oklahoma's at a very low number. They've done really fantastic work. They have a pretty new, magnificent arena, as you probably have heard, and we're getting exact numbers out, but we're either close to or over 1 million people wanting to go.
President Donald Trump says he'll push ahead with a massive indoor campaign rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma this Saturday, even as COVID cases are surging there. 99 years ago this month, Tulsa was the site of the deadliest massacre of African Americans in U.S. history, when a white mob killed as many as 300 people.
I will always remember 4 men coming in our house with torches, and my mother saw them coming, and she put the 4 of we children under the bed. And from under the bed, we could see them walking to the curtains and setting fire to the curtains to set our house on fire.
We'll go to Tulsa to speak with Hannibal Johnson, author of Black Wall Street, From Riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood district. Then to the second most economically unequal district in New York State, the Bronx, where an insurgent campaign for Congress is threatening to unseat 16-term Congress member, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Eliot Engel.
This is the worst crisis since the Great Depression, and people don't know where their congressman is? He's taken us for granted. After 31 years of the same, it's time for a change. We'll
speak with former middle school principal Jamal Bowman, who has just been endorsed by Senator Elizabeth Warren, is also backed by Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the New York Times. And we'll look at moves to privatize Puerto Rico's electric grid as hurricane season begins again. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In the United States, 740 people have died of coronavirus over the past 24 hours, bringing the death toll to nearly 117,000. More Americans have now died from the virus than were killed in World War I. The Washington Post is reporting 9 states reported single-day highs of COVID cases Tuesday on new 7-day average highs. The states are Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Nevada, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, and Texas. President Trump is scheduled to hold a campaign rally indoors in Tulsa on Saturday. Despite warnings from public health officials, the director of the Tulsa Health Department said he wishes Trump would postpone the indoor event. The Oklahoma Health Commissioner has urged all attendees to get tested for COVID and to wear face masks. 2 Oklahoma lawyers have sued an attempt to halt the rally, saying the event will endanger the entire Tulsa community. Trump's visit comes as the administration continues to downplay the severity of the pandemic. They will not require face masks at the rally, but they are requiring liability waivers people have to sign in case they get COVID-19 so they don't sue the Trump campaign. The White House Coronavirus Task Force has not held a briefing since April 27th. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal says the number of COVID deaths in nursing homes and long-term care facilities has now topped 50,000 in the United States. This comes as the number of COVID-19 cases in prisons is skyrocketing. According to the New York Times, 68,000 prisoners have now been infected. The number's doubled over the past month. In Arizona, the ACLU and other groups have sued the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, seeking the release of vulnerable people from county jails. In recent weeks, the number of confirmed COVID cases in the county jail system has jumped from just 6 to over 300, a 5,000% increase. Meanwhile, COVID outbreaks at meatpacking plants continue to grow. At least 89 meatpackers have died. In April, President Trump ordered meatpacking plants to stay open despite the health risks, while the meatpacking industry has warned of possible shortages of meats exports of meat has reached a new high. A new report reveals the United States exported nearly 129,000 tons of pork to China in April. That's the highest monthly amount ever. On the international front, scientists in Britain say new tests have shown a widely used steroid called dexamethasone can greatly reduce death rates among the most severely ill COVID-19 patients. The World Health Organization described the findings as great news. In China, Beijing has closed its schools again and canceled thousands of flights after a new COVID outbreak. 106 Beijing residents have tested positive over the past week. In India, the death toll has reached nearly 12,000 after authorities registered more than 2,000 deaths on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Pakistan reported 140 people died over the past day, a new daily high. In Latin America, Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez has announced he has tested positive for coronavirus along with his wife and 2 aides. Hernandez says he began to feel unwell over the weekend. In Australia, authorities have announced Australia's borders will likely remain closed until 2021. Meanwhile, the United States has announced its borders with Mexico and Canada will remain closed to non-essential travel for at least another month. In other coronavirus news, a new study in the journal Health Affairs estimates as many as 450,000 cases of COVID-19 could have been prevented if states had mandated the wearing of face masks. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order on policing following more than 3 weeks of nationwide protests over the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The order calls for the creation of a national police misconduct database and to give federal grants to departments to improve training. Trump resisted growing calls to back an outright ban on the use of police chokeholds. Instead, the order calls on officers to only use them if they feel that their lives are endangered. During an address at the White House surrounded by police officials, Trump made no mention of systemic racism and sought to downplay the crisis.
Nobody is more opposed to the small number of bad police officers, and you have them. They're very tiny. I use the word tiny. It's a very small percentage, but you have them.
Civil rights leaders and legal advocates widely criticized Trump's executive order. The Reverend Al Sharpton called it toothless and meaningless. Kristen Clark of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law described it as anemic.
This order was incredibly anemic in that it does not deal with racial profiling. It does not impose a ban on chokeholds and neck holds. It does not end qualified immunity for officers. It does not strengthen the tools that we need to hold officers accountable and to make it possible to prosecute officers who use deadly or excessive force without basis.
Protests against police brutality and racism are continuing across the country. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, dozens of protesters have entered their 5th day, camped outside Bridgeport's police department. Members of the group Justice for Jason are calling on the police chief to fire police officer James Boulay, who shot dead 15-year-old Jason Negron 3 years ago. Jason's sister, Jasmarie Melendez, is helping to organize the occupation.
We are in a state of emergency. We are no longer going to wait around for these people in power to listen to us. We are going to occupy this space until our demands are met, and we will not be leaving.
In Richmond, Virginia, the mayor has ousted the city's police chief after Richmond officers fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters Sunday and Monday night. Richmond officers had also tear gassed protesters earlier this month as they peacefully gathered at a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. According to the New York Times, at least 97 law enforcement agencies have used some form of tear gas against civilians protesting in recent weeks. And in Buffalo, New York, 75-year-old peace activist Martin Gugino is continuing to recover after being shoved by 2 police officers on June 4th. Gugino has suffered brain injury, a fractured skull, and is still unable to walk. 2 police officers have been charged with assault. In active duty, Air Force sergeant with ties to the far-right Boogaloo movement, has been arrested for killing 2 law enforcement officials in California in recent weeks. Staff Sergeant Stephen Carrillo is accused of shooting dead a federal security officer in Oakland during the protests over the police killings of George Floyd in May. Later, Carrillo killed a deputy sergeant in the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office. Carrillo's lawyer says the Air Force sergeant had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. FBI Special Agent Jack Bennett spoke Tuesday.
To be clear, Carrillo elected to travel to Oakland to conduct this murder and take advantage of a time when this nation was mourning the killing of George Floyd. There is no evidence that these men had any intention to join the demonstration in Oakland, as some in the media have asked. They came to Oakland to kill cops.
Authorities have also arrested an accomplice of Sergeant Carrillo's. Earlier this month, federal prosecutors in Las Vegas charged 3 other men connected to the far-right Boogaloo movement with inciting violence during the recent protests and conspiracy to commit terrorism. The 3 men also had experience in the U.S. military. In Portland, Oregon, police have opened an investigation into the death of an African-American trans woman named Tete Gully, who was found hanging in a tree in late May. The local medical examiner ruled her death to be a suicide, but her family believes she may have been killed. Her death comes as federal authorities probe 2 recent hanging deaths of black men in California. Meanwhile, in New York, a protest is scheduled for Saturday to demand a full investigation into the death of Dominique Alexander, a 27-year-old black man who was found hanged in a Manhattan park last week. The local medical examiner's office ruled the cause of his death was suicide. The Equal Justice Initiative has issued a new report documenting nearly 2,000 confirmed lynchings of black people by white mobs in the United States between 1865 to 1877. The group, which was founded by Brian Stevenson, has spent years documenting the legacy of racial terror in the United States. It has previously documented 4,400 lynchings of black people in the U.S. between 1877 and 1950. In international news, at least 20 Indian troops have died in a border clash with Chinese soldiers in the Himalayas. It was the first deadly encounter by the 2 nuclear-armed neighbors in 45 years. China accused the Indian troops of crossing the disputed border, but India rejected the claim. Tensions are escalating on the Korean peninsula 1 day after North Korea blew up a joint liaison office near the South Korean border. The office was set up after the 2018 peace talks. North Korea has also threatened to send troops back to the border. Meanwhile, South Korean unification minister has offered his resignation as ties between North and South Korea worsen. Sweeping new U.S. sanctions on Syria go into effect today, despite warnings from aid groups that the sanctions could disproportionately impact Syrian civilians. University of Oklahoma professor Joshua Landis said, quote, "Sanctions are sure to hurt many innocent people. Syrians are already on their knees. This will simply bring them a bit lower," he said. The California utility company PG&E has confessed to killing 84 people as it pleads guilty to involuntary manslaughter charges over its role in starting devastating fires in Northern California in 2018. The fires destroyed 18,000 structures. Butte County District Attorney Mike Ramsey described the plea deal as unprecedented.
We're in our North County court today. Saw something of an unprecedented nature. A major United States corporation pleading guilty to 85 felony counts, 84 of which were homicide counts. In other words, killing 84 Butte County citizens.
In immigration news, prisoners held at the Otay Mesa Detention Center in San Diego have reportedly been blocked from communicating with members of the group Otay Mesa Detention Resistance. The activist group has been instrumental in documenting the conditions at the privately run immigrant jail and offered support during recent hunger strikes. The jail has one of the largest coronavirus outbreaks of any immigration jail in the country. To watch our interview with a member of the Otay Mesa Detention Resistance, go to democracynow.org. In Mexico, about a dozen families whose loved ones have been disappeared have been camping outside the home of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador for almost 2 weeks, demanding his government search for the over 60,000 people who've gone missing in Mexico and bring their families justice. The families say the nationwide coronavirus lockdown has disrupted search missions and that proposed austerity measures announced in April will likely end vital funding and support to families of the disappeared. The Trump administration has sued former National Security Advisor John Bolton in a bid to block the publication of his forthcoming book. The Justice Department claims the book could compromise national security and that it did not go through the necessary pre-publication review process. President Trump recently publicly warned Bolton about publishing the book.
I will consider every conversation with me as president highly classified. So that would mean that if he wrote a book and if the book gets out, he's broken the law.
Meanwhile, the Daily Beast is reporting the White House is also looking into ways to block the publication of a forthcoming book by Trump's niece, Mary Trump. Her book is titled Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman here in New York with Juan Gonzalez, who's broadcasting from his home in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, we begin today's show in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where President Donald Trump will host a massive indoor campaign rally Saturday, despite concerns that the gathering will lead to a surge in COVID-19 cases in a state where the virus is already alarmingly on the rise. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported Oklahoma has seen a 7.7% increase in COVID cases, the largest in the country. Tulsa's health director said he wished the president would postpone the rally, the first since the outbreak of the coronavirus in the U.S. in March, due to concerns about the virus. The mayor has also said he doesn't want it there now. 2 Oklahoma lawyers have sued an attempt to halt the rally, saying the event will endanger the Tulsa community. Despite public health experts' warnings against large indoor gatherings, the Trump administration is moving forward with plans to fill the 19,000-seat arena for the rally, with tens of thousands more in the nearby convention center. Vice President Mike Pence, who will attend the rally, falsely claimed that, in a very real sense, Oklahoma had flattened the curve of COVID infections. This is Trump speaking Monday.
Oklahoma's at a very low number. They've done really fantastic work. They have a pretty new, magnificent arena, as you probably have heard, and we're getting exact numbers out, but we're either close to or over 1 million people wanting to go. We have a 22,000-seat arena, but I think we're going to also take the convention hall next door, and that's going to hold 40,000, so we'll have 22,000 plus 40,000, which would mean that we'll have over 900,000 people that won't be able to go, but hopefully they'll be watching.
The Trump campaign is requiring attendees to his rally to sign a waiver absolving the campaign of liability if an attendee contracts COVID-19, but they are not requiring the attendees to wear masks in contravention of the CDC. This comes as President Trump also faces outrage for choosing Tulsa, Oklahoma as the location of his first rally amidst a nationwide uprising against racism and police brutality. The Trump administration rescheduled the rally to Saturday after originally announcing it would be held this Friday. That's June 19th, or Juneteenth, a celebration of African Americans' liberation from slavery. But Tulsa is also the site of one of the deadliest massacres in U.S. history. In 1921, 99 years ago this month, a white mob attacked a black neighborhood in Tulsa, killing as many as 300 African Americans. Over 2 days, white mobs set fire to homes, businesses, and churches in Greenwood, a thriving African American business district known at the time as Black Wall Street. When the smoke cleared, the area lay in ruins. This is an excerpt from a History Channel documentary, The Night Tulsa Burned, which features some of the survivors who were just children when the attack occurred. This is George Monroe, followed by Juanita Burnett-Arnold and Ernestine Alpha Gibbs.
I will always remember 4 men coming in our house with torches, and my mother saw them coming, and she put the 4 of we children under the bed. And from under the bed, we could see them walking to the curtains and setting fire to the curtains to set our house on fire.
We start hearing shots, and my grandfather told us all to get up. And we got up, and we could see smoke and hear shots, and we couldn't sleep or anything. We were just frightened nearly to death. As soon as daylight came, we looked outside. All of these people were coming down this railroad track. Didn't nobody try to take a thing, and those people were coming along wasn't trying to, they just had clothes on, that's all. Didn't try to take anything.
For more, we go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we're joined by Hannibal Johnson, attorney and author of several books about the history of Tulsa's African-American community, including Black Wall Street, From Riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood District, Up from the Ashes and Images of America, Tulsa's historic Greenwood District. So if you could start, Hannibal Johnson, by talking about what happened 99 years ago this month.
What happened in Tulsa in 1921 was really emblematic of the racial violence that pervaded the United States during that period. In fact, historians and sociologists refer to the early part of the 20th century as the nadir of race relations in America, the low point of race relations in America, because of the proliferation of these so-called race riots, mostly invasions of Black communities by vigilante white mobs, and because of the prevalence of lynching being a form of domestic terrorism, targeting primarily African Americans. So this was a period fraught with racial violence and historical racial trauma. The event in Tulsa is the worst of the so-called race riots during this period in terms of its magnitude. The business community in the Greenwood District, the Black sector in Tulsa, was highly developed. A great concentration of service providers like doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, and dentists, but all manner of business enterprises, small businesses like movie theaters, dance halls, barber shops, restaurants, grocery stores, haberdasheries, shine shops, a real concentration of Black entrepreneurship and Black wealth in a 35 square block area in Tulsa, Oklahoma, separated from downtown Tulsa by the Frisco tracks.
Mr. Hannibal Johnson, you mentioned the racial conflicts of that period, which many Americans are not aware of, but there were throughout the country in the World War I, post-World War I period, there were these huge conflicts. There was the Houston Mutiny of 1917 of Black soldiers against racism that they were perceiving in the military. There was the East St. Louis riot of 1917, the Chicago riot of 1919, and the Elaine, Arkansas massacre, where about over 100 African Americans were massacred in Elaine. Was part of this the result of the fact that as African Americans, we began being impressed into the military? There was even more a willingness on the one hand of African Americans to stand up for their rights, and also of whites to seek to suppress the African American community.
Right. I think it's important to understand the pervasiveness and the power of white supremacy as a philosophy during this period. So we had these African American men who went off to war in foreign countries, sacrificed their lives potentially for the country and for their American citizenship. They come back to the United States and they're treated as, at best, second-class citizens, at worst, subhuman. So Black men were much more vocal about protecting their civil rights after having served in World War I. On the flip side of that, the white community, noticing this new sense of emboldenment on the part of African Americans, was determined to enforce white supremacy. And these events that were called race riots and these lynchings are really in service of white supremacy.
It's very interesting because we've been looking at the bringing down of the Confederate statues around the country and the naming of military bases after Confederates like Fort Bragg. And this was right around the same time, not during the Civil War, but way after, that they named these bases after Confederate soldiers, again, as they saw the rising empowerment of African Americans to pull them down. I wanted to go to Tulsa native Professor Olivia Hooker, a survivor of the Greenwood Massacre, describing the attack on her community that took place when she was just 6 years old. She was 92 when she did this interview.
I refuse to call it a riot because it was really, whites decided to burn down the homes of 10,000 people. So that was not a riot. It was planned desecration. And when the mobs came in, they had those pine, knots all lighted up, and they set things on fire. And my mother refused to run because she was busy putting water on the house to try to keep it from burning. And so she put the children under the big oak table. They had those great big tables in those days with little nooks under them. So we were under the table when the mobs came in.
So that's Tulsa native Professor Olivia Hooker talking about what happened in 1921. And I wanted to ask you, Hannibal Johnson, about President Trump choosing Tulsa. Now, of course, there's the surge, and we know that COVID-19 hits the African-American community much harder than the rest of the community in this country. There's a surge in Tulsa. Many of the leaders are asking for it not to be held there. And he was going to hold it Friday, Juneteenth, the celebration of the end of slavery, which has outraged so many that even President Trump was forced to put it off for a day. Kamala Harris, the senator from California, vying for the vice presidency under a President Joe Biden administration, if that were to happen, said this isn't just a wink to white supremacists. He's throwing them a welcome home party. Can you respond to this choice of location and the original date?
Right. So the rally is troubling to a lot of people because of both the venue, Tulsa, and because of the timing. So we're in the midst of a COVID pandemic. We're in the midst of a surge here in Tulsa, bringing thousands of people together in a tight space where it's not possible to socially distance, where people don't have to wear masks. Those people are going to attend the rally, then they're going to spill out into the community writ large and pose substantial risk to all of us here. So that in and of itself is a problem. The other problem with timing is that even though the rally has now been moved to June 20th as opposed to June 19th, it's still Juneteenth weekend. There still are festivities going on. It's a celebratory atmosphere of a very significant day in our history, particularly for African Americans. The rally comes 2.5 weeks after the 99th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. So it's an issue of sensitivity at the very least. And the other dynamic that's important to think about is the character of the rally. And we know something about the potential character of the rally based on prior experience with these sorts of rallies, which tend to be raucous. They tend to be exclusive rather than inclusive. They tend to have elements of race and racism as part of the experience. So that troubles a lot of people because here in Tulsa, we are working hard on reconciliation, on moving our community closer together as we approach the 100th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. And the rally has the potential to be a disruptor to where we are on the road to reconciliation.
I wanted to ask you, of course, the country has been swept for weeks now by protests over police abuse and the murders of African Americans. But the Tulsa police major, Travis Yates, recently denied the existence of systemic racism in the police force. He said African Americans probably should be shot more. In a recording, you can hear him say, quote, "All of the research says we're shooting African Americans about 24% less than we probably ought to be based on the crimes being committed." Your response to the police major in your city?
Well, he says that remark was taken out of context, but the remark speaks for itself. It is deeply troubling. It has been rebuked by both the police chief, Wendell Franklin, and the mayor, G.T. Bynum. And it is not reflective of the officers, ranking officers, whom I know and have worked with for many, many, many years. But again, it is deeply troubling. Whatever the context may have been, whatever the intention may have been, it's deeply problematic. To put those words together on a radio show in the midst of all the things that the country is going through and all the things that we've gone through here in Tulsa.
And of course, you have the situation of the two kids. I don't even want to say jaywalking. 13-year-old Tulsa residents who were brutalized by the police. I mean, the video of these kids, one of them put in the car, and you see the police officer kicking him. They accuse him of jaywalking on a rural road. I mean, one of these kids is 13 years old that doesn't have sidewalks. Hannibal Johnson, have they been suspended? Have they been fired? Have they been charged with assault, meaning the police officers?
So all I know is that the matter is under investigation, as well it should be. On the surface of things, based on the facts that we know, as you just recited them, this is deeply disturbing and troubling. So we need to find the facts, and we need to hold people accountable as appropriate based on the facts and circumstances that are determined through the investigatory process.
Well, Hannibal Johnson, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Attorney and author of Black Wall Street, From Riot to Renaissance in Tulsa's historic Greenwood District. Final question, 20 seconds. Are people getting reparations for what happened in 1921? Wasn't there a commission set up that said they should?
There was a commission that was convened in 1997, issued a final report in February of 2001. It recommended reparations for riot survivors and descendants of riot survivors who could prove loss of property. There was a lawsuit filed in the early 2000s. It was dismissed on the basis of statute of limitations. So cash reparations to individuals have not happened. We are looking at reparations in other forms, including building a substantial history center here in the Greenwood District, a pathway to hope that connects various sites in the Greenwood District, and other initiatives that are more community-based rather than individually focused.
Thank you so much, Hannibal Johnson. We will continue to look at Tulsa on Friday on Democracy Now!, when we'll be joined by the sister, the twin, of a man who was killed by police in 2016. Her great-grandmother survived the Tulsa race massacre. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Puerto Rico. Stay with us.